Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to week 3 of our online parenting series sponsored by the Academy for Islamic Studies. These series are all the essentials of positive. And today, inshallah, is that better? Is the sound better now? Can everyone hear me? Try again. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Can people hear me now? Okay, great. My mic is actually turned up pretty high, and I'm wearing headset as well. So hopefully it will become clearer. So let's begin. Just a bit of review from last time. We started talking about discipline versus punishment. And what we said about that, basically, to put it in a nutshell, was that discipline was an ongoing process. It was not reactive after the fact, as punishment is, and it's the underlying theme of discipline was training the child in the kinds of behaviors that you want. Okay. Then we had a chart on understanding this behavior, and again the idea behind that was that if we know why the child is acting up, then we can respond in an appropriate way. For example, a child who is hungry or tired and is unable to manage his actions because of that, it's no point at that point to say putting them in a timeout or doing any other thing. Obviously, we need to respond to their needs. And then we started talking about discipline strategies, and we spent quite a bit of time because there were a lot of questions around family meetings. So hopefully, the basic, just to recap, the idea was that family meetings are an excellent way of short-circuiting many issues in a family. And the idea is that family meetings are a space to actually gather and discuss issues before they become huge problems, and to to circumvent again things from blowing up. Also, the idea is that when normally, the only conversations many of us tend to have around problem behaviors or issues in the family is when an event occurs which we do not like. And the idea is at that point, usually emotions are running high, people are stressed, and those are not great times to have conversations which will be productive. Family meetings provide that forum whereby you can actually sit and discuss. Say, for example, if somebody is chronically late, or if there is no if people are not cleaning up after themselves. For those kinds of things, family meetings are great. Okay, I actually am using both headphones and a mic, and my mic is turned up full, so I'm wondering what else I can do. So with the earphones, is it better? Can you hear properly? Javeen, can you hear? Okay. Okay. It seems like some people can hear and others can't, which leads me to suggest maybe a quick sign out and sign back in sometimes fixes the problem. So it seems that some people can hear fine, which means obviously that the connection seems to be okay. So let's carry on. Um, and just to let people know, actually, I've just written a new blog on the benefits of family meetings, and I'm hoping that in the near future, inshallah, I can write some more about the structure and the content of family meetings, so everyone will have a little bit more detail on that. We did talk about the structure in that everyone in the family should be given a chance to speak, and the idea is that everyone can put agenda things on the table. We said that even really young children can be invited to participate, and it should be short so that it doesn't become a cumbersome thing. Obviously, if children are very young, even to start out with 15 minutes is a really good idea. And even with older children, it's never a good idea to exceed. When I'm saying 1 hour, that's really long. So half an hour should be actually enough, unless there are many things to discuss, or if there's a huge issue that the family is facing. But again, if this thing is done consistently, then usually half an hour to 40 minutes, even with older children, seems to work okay. And another just to recap from the point from last week was that often families find that as soon as they start having family meetings, things actually do start to go a lot smoother at home. And many parents mistakenly think that since they are going so well, we don't really need to continue this, not recognizing that it is because of the family meetings that things are going well. And you know if you stop and you find things are slipping back where they were, which is again a very common experience, the idea is just to get back on track. My 7-year-old was very excited about the meeting, and she herself took the notes and brought out a couple of issues to discuss, which was a success. I'm so glad to hear that, and that again is a very common experience that especially young children really like it, because obviously it gives them it really gives the family a sense of quote unquote venus, and as opposed to me. So also young children really begin to recognize how everyone's behavior impacts each other. So I'm glad that some of you did try it, and if there are other questions around that, let's deal with them now before we. So the agenda for today, inshallah, is we are going to be continuing our big topic, which is managing undesirable behavior, and we're talking about discipline strategies. So the first one was the family meetings, which we discussed last time. So it was there's a comment. It was hard work to work out which issues to discuss. So are you saying that there were too many, or you couldn't find anything? Because both could be um, either or. Hard to find. Okay, so that's great, which means obviously, uh, you know, you are on track in the sense if there aren't any major issues. But what I would recommend is that it's a really good family management technique in any case. So you can start the discipline of it, and I can guarantee you in the future pretty much that there will be times when there will be things to discuss, and it will be, because the family will already be in the habit of doing this, it will be so much easier. Yes, you can certainly run a course for us, Laura, to tell us how you're managing. So today, inshallah, we will be talking about three main discipline strategies. The one is natural and logical consequences. The second is timeout. And the third is what is called the six-step process for encouraging cooperation. And I think we probably would spend the most time on timeouts just because it tends to be the go-to technique for for a lot of parents with young children. I mean, obviously, it doesn't really work too well with older children. But the younger the child is, it can work really well. And actually, it is, it can be extremely effective if done properly. So, we will spend a bit of time on that. And then, if we have time today, inshallah, we can start talking about building the positive relationships, or, we can cover that and see how it is. We talked about this again, and I would, invite you to keep reflecting on this about, what's the difference between discipline and punishment, and again, why do I want to discipline my children? Because often, it would be the parents' need, and that's why it's a good idea to ask that question. So timeout. So exactly what is a timeout? Is placing a misbehaving child in a quiet place alone for a few minutes and then talking about the problem. Okay, so that's the classical way timeout is used. It's a short, boring time away from other people. So the idea is both are important. The first thing is that it needs to be short. If it's too long, it's likely to backfire. Secondly, it is boring in the sense that obviously if the child is having a really good time and time out, or if they have a lot of things to occupy themselves with, it's not an effective. And it can be sometimes effective for children from 3 to 12 generally when they are noisy, fighting, or doing something so annoying that you can't ignore. And it can be quite effective to calm everyone involved, not as a way to punish the child. So again, the idea is that if you're using it as a technique to discipline a child, it can actually be great. So what are some of the advantages? Obviously, it puts limits on behavior and gives a very clear sign to the child what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Now, it's important to mention that it only actually acts as a deterrent and puts a limit on behavior when it is taking the child away from something fun. What do I mean by that? So say, for example, if, your preschool or say young children, elementary school children are playing, and you notice, your child is either pushing his weight around or, being aggressive with the other children, but everyone's clearly having a good time, removing him from that situation as a timeout would be a very good use of it, because he obviously wants to get back in the game. When it's not effective is when the child is anyway bored. So for example, if the child is sitting, in the mosque, right, and they are misbehaving, and you take them away from that and you put them in timeout, it's really not likely to be very effective. Why? Because it's obviously the timeout is probably better for the child than sitting, in a quiet way when everybody else seems to be paying attention to something. So again, the idea is that if it's actually giving, by the way, timeout, the full thing, it started out by the full version of it is called time out from positive reinforcement. So the idea is that you take the child away so that their behavior is not positively reinforced, right? Which speaks a lot to withholding attention. Because remember last time we said that a lot of children misbehave or just simply to get parents' attention. So if at that point you engage with them and you're giving them more attention, obviously they're going to likely to continue to misbehave, right? So when you are using a discipline technique, the idea is that you shouldn't engage with them. So even if you're taking a child into timeout, it's very likely that they will act out or they will throw a tantrum. And basically at that point, they're just testing you out. And, basically whoever is the stronger one is going to win. So if you manage to stay calm, you invite yourself to not engage with the child emotionally, you do it consistently, then it will be a very good, technique. Again, it's simple to do, obviously. It's not easy for a lot of parents. It's extremely challenging, but it's simple enough. It also really helps calm the parents down themselves. It can, right? Because the idea is that if you engage with the child when they're in timeout, obviously they're not calming down and you're not calming down. But if they're in a safe place and in a quiet place where there is not too much to entertain them, and you yourself can manage to basically soothe yourself. It's certainly better than spanking or hitting or name calling or any of the other things that we mentioned last. It's transferable among caregivers. So again, if this is something that you use in your home, you can certainly, if somebody else is taking care of your child, it's easy enough to explain to them what to do and how long to do it, and they're looking after children. It was initially developed, by the way, for children with ADD, like attention deficit disorder. And again, the idea is that, putting them in a quiet place really helps calm them down because their senses and obviously we know that children with ADD are highly sensitive to stimulation, and the idea is that in quiet time, in time out, the stimulation is much reduced. And again, so the idea that sometimes it does, attain the short-term goal of stopping. What are some of the disadvantages? Obviously, and this, by the way, if you've heard of attachment parenting or if you have, if you've read any books or if you've ever attended a course on attachment parenting, actually, proponents of attachment parenting tend to be really against timeout. And the reason is because they believe that the number one need for the child is to belong and attachment to the family. So, these disadvantages are basically, from that camp. So, again, I thought it's a good thing to mention because, it is a thing which can very easily be misused. So it is important to understand it so that it can be done properly. So let's go to a few of the questions. Does it have to be for set time or is it situation dependent? So that's a great question. Usually, the rule of thumb is 1 minute per age of the child. So for a 3-year-old, for example, 3 minutes. Now, often what happens is with older children, and if you're using it to calm down, then you could also, one way to use it, which can be effective, is that the time starts once they have calmed down. So, for example, if they are kicking and screaming or shouting, the timer doesn't really begin. Like their 3 minutes doesn't begin, right? Now, again, every child is different, and you need to see what would work in your situation. I've been reading that timeout is not an effective method as you are doing long-term damage as the child cannot control their emotions and you're leaving them to deal with their emotions by themselves, thus causing more problems for the future. Not sure if I'm making sense. What are your thoughts? Um, Benazir, yes, definitely. There is lots actually. If you do a little research, you will find a lot in both camps. Um, the people who say that time out is a wonderful thing, and the people who say that time out is an awful thing. Again, I tend to go and look at what the research says, and it seems that the research says that actually timeout, if used properly, obviously, can be extremely helpful in controlling misbehavior. And what actually surprised me was that it's more effective than other forms of positive reinforcement, such as just praising the child or encouraging the child. So again, the idea is that it is one tool and it is one technique. And when we finish talking about the whole thing, you will understand that, again, the way I like to look at it is a little bit, it's a little bit of a different frame on the normal way timeout is used. I've read the same thing. I've also heard people using time instead. What do you think about that? So we're going to be talking about that as well. It worked for me, only needed to use it for a short period and have not needed it. I put my son on the timeout thinking step and do time in and drop it. I used to call it the thinking step. Um, so, yes, again, the idea is that if we use it consistently and if it's used appropriately, it can actually be very helpful. So, so again, talking about the disadvantages, the people who say that it doesn't work say that it is a negative punishment rather than a positive life skill that invites power struggles. It encourages submission to a bigger sized person, fails to teach problem solving skills, can incite anger, frustration, and resentment, can promote rebellion, fails to teach internal controls and self discipline, and fails to teach conflict resolution. So, as you can see, there is, things on again, research does not really believe in all this, in the sense it doesn't, this has not been shown by research that if you use timeout as one strategy for parenting, that it will cause long-term damage to the child. Okay. And, in fact, one of the most validated and research-based programs which I trained with, which is called Triple P, the Positive Parenting Program, which comes out of Australia. And it is actually probably the gold standard in terms of parenting programs, simply because it is so research-based. They actually, whatever they use has been tested, and it's not just somebody thinking it's a good idea. And for one of the biggest techniques they use is actually timeout. So again, going on, it's more of the same kind of thing. It isolates the child rather than promote connection, which again you can tell even just by reading about it, that it's coming from the attachment camp. And so gives negative attention to misbehavior, which may increase misbehavior. So again, I don't agree with that, because it's actually the whole point of timeout is to withdraw attention, not give it more attention. And obviously, if you label the child, all of us know that by now, that we don't label children in terms of the naughty child goes to the naughty step. It increases original and repeat behaviors because the underlying needs don't, and children often do not know or understand why they are in timeout. So obviously, the idea is that they need to understand why they are there for sure, right? You don't really use timeout without having a ground rule first. and without talking to them, what would be the consequence of breaking the ground. So so what is the program called? Triple P? Yes, that's exactly what it is called, PPP, but it's often called Triple P, just like you've written it. The discussion about the issue should follow the timeout, and that will happen. Yes, for sure. So, here's how to use it effectively. First of all, obviously, we need to ask ourselves whether the child's behavior is defiant or that she simply doesn't have the skills think they have. Okay? So again, if it is a question of, say, for example, you're asking the child to tie their shoelaces and get on with it and get in the car and everyone's in a rush, I mean, we can all relate to that, right? That's a very common thing. And if they simply don't know how to tie their shoelaces, and that's why they're getting frustrated and they are crying or, throwing a tantrum, the idea is obviously that putting a child in timeout at that point will not be helpful because the point is that they don't know how, and that is what's frustrating them. So obviously, timeout should be used sparingly. If you find yourself using it on a daily basis or using it more than once a day, then that's a signal that it's probably not working, and we need to either change strategies or look at what is causing the mistake. And then obviously balance it with a rich diet of positive time in. So I think a few of you mentioned this, that the idea of time in simply means spending positive quality time with the child. So obviously time out will work if the child is used to getting a lot of positive attention from you. If, for example, you are baking cookies, together in the kitchen, and the child, for whatever reason, has a meltdown, and you put them, is, by the way, timeout doesn't have to be in a separate area of the house or whatever. It can be in the same room, in a quiet space, as long as the whole point is that you're not giving them attention at that point. Young children, as we know, thrive on parental attention, and it is extremely important that we do not withhold attention as a punishment, right? So if you're angry with the child, that's not a good enough reason to use to withdraw attention from the child. The idea is that timeout is for the child to learn skills to manage themselves. So, again, the idea is that if you have a lot of positive interaction with the child, if you put a child in a place where you're not giving it that, you're not giving them that much attention, they are going to, it's going to be effective. They will change their behavior because they are thriving on that. Obviously, talk about it beforehand, in the sense, if you're noticing that, a child is is hitting a younger child frequently, then obviously we need to sit with them and explain that it's not acceptable behavior, that we keep our hands to ourselves in this house, and if it happens again, then we are going to be using timeout. The idea is, obviously, if you have quote unquote threatened me, it's extremely important that you follow through. But also, again, with caution, in the sense that, it's a whole, it's one part of the whole parenting picture, right? So, for example, if a young child is hitting another sibling, especially a younger sibling, there's a whole reason, array of reasons why that could be so, and so again, timeout in the short term is a good, may help them calm down. But again, if it is because they feel the younger child is getting a lot of attention, then obviously we need to put some other things in place as well. And this, I think, is probably the key for me. In other words, that we need to frame it as a way to self-soothe and calm down. So, and that, by the way, that's why I don't agree with the camp that says that it doesn't teach them life skills, because I believe that timeout, if used properly, is actually teaching extremely valuable skills, which is that if you are in a situation which is causing you stress, instead of doing more damage, you need to remove yourself and calm down before you engage again. And that follows the second point, which is that modeling it yourself. So it's a really, you know, children need to see us taking responsibility for ourselves. So, I would very often say that, I need a timeout because, the situation or whatever makes me angry, and I don't want to say things that I will later regret. When we start talking like that, and when we follow the same rules that we are telling our children to follow, it's everything actually becomes much easier, and you will find that they will want to do it for themselves. And it won't be such a struggle. And this we already talked about, that withhold attention while the child is in timeout. In other words, if they're throwing a tantrum and you keep engaging with them and telling them, threatening them or whatever, like if you are hooked to the child while the child is in timeout, it's not going to be effective, because it is going to be, they're still getting the attention. So, and the next point is that obviously when timeout is over, we need to descriptively praise the first positive thing that they do. The idea is that once timeout is done, they've sort of done their time. And you don't need to, you don't need to punish them anymore. In terms of talking it over afterwards, the experts are mixed about that. For example, Triple P says that there is actually no need to discuss it after, because the child, if you have explained to the child, what, why they were in timeout. I mean, in the sense, if the conversation has been had before, then that's it. You really don't need to give a lecture after it's over. Just it should be a really matter of fact thing that you do. And I've got the link. I posted it on Twitter today about there's a really good article on the Huffington Post about the timeout. So I invite you to read that. There's a question. I was doing homework with my 7-year-old and we didn't agree on his assignment method. And he was getting quite frustrated. And at some point I thought he was being disrespectful. Should I have been calm and reverted the matter, or should I have asserted that I'm his parent? The level of respect should be there. Yes, it is. It's not really about timeout, and I'm not sure what the question is. I'm not sure what you mean by you didn't agree on his assignment method. Homework, again, is a very big issue, which I tend to have a slightly different view to a lot of people, in the sense that I really believe that the job of a parent is to provide this quiet space and, the distraction-free space. But again, doing homework with the children, I don't think personally that it's a really good idea. And especially if you are not agreeing on the assignment method. I'm assuming what you mean is the way he's doing the homework. So again, he could have been taught something different at school. And, the idea is that if, he is doing it the way he has been taught and he goes back, the feedback should come from the school. So I know even some schools give homework for children, which really tends to be the parents' homework. And honestly, the way I look at it, I've finished school. Like, I don't want to do it again. So, I have a lot of, I really believe that our job as parents is the moral, emotional social development. Really, I don't like, and again, you know, we could probably spend the whole hour discussing this. But personally, I don't think it's a great idea for parents to be. So yes, if he's been taught a different method, then I would suggest that, you know, because it's only going to be confusing for him if, you know, if you're teaching him something different than what he's been taught at school. So let's, I'd like to talk now about natural and logical consequences. Natural consequences is um, are what occur without any interference on the part of the parents, and they're not controlled by the parents. So for example, the child forgets their lunch, and what's the natural consequence of forgetting your lunch is that you remain hungry. And now the thing with natural consequences is that they do take longer for learning, but they may be a lot more effective. And it takes a lot of patience from parents in the short term. And that's why many parents simply cannot watch their children, quote unquote, struggle or, yeah, basically struggle in the short term. And, you know, we go and we rescue them, right? I don't know if it was this or the, you know, the last course we were doing, I mentioned saying that if you stand between the child and the problem, then you are becoming the problem. Very strong statement. But again, the idea is that the best way to teach children is that if they are, you know, again, it needs to be used with discretion, right? But for example, if you find that you are taking lunch to a child at school, which, you know, they've forgotten it 3 days in a row, or they forget it at least 2 or 3 times a week, or they forget their homework, and you find yourself driving to school to drop it off, which is again a very common experience for many parents of young children. Uh, you know, to me, that's a signal that what you're doing is not working. A. And B, that in that situation, natural consequences would probably teach them a lot more than your nagging or, you know, the worst thing is that we do it, right? We will keep taking the lunch or the homework to school. We will resent it and we will tell them off, and none of that is effective. You know, so the idea is, you know, let's cut down on the nagging and, you know, like what I'm saying is it does take patience from parents in the short term. It does. So again, going back to the homework and the grades. So the idea is obviously we create the environment. So if the environment in our house is the one that respects learning, that respects discipline, that respects routine, that has the environment which is conducive to learning and study, right? Which means the entire family is modeling that. Okay, so that's the groundwork that the parents lay. Despite that, there is a child, because if that's the environment in the house, more likely than not, the child will be wanting to do well. So, you know, they have some, you know, they do want to do well, but this has never been tested because the parent is continuously, you know, doing the homework, helping the child, finishing projects, whatever, right? Why? Because the parent does not want to see a bad grade on the report card in the short term. Now, again, this is, you know, usually the parent's issue because if we really want to train the child, you know, if you want them to become self-motivated and to stand on their own feet, you need to back off a little bit in the short term. If they do badly on one course, which will be a learning experience for them, that is far more valuable in my view than them never getting anything less than an A their whole life but at the cost of their relationship with the parents and stressed out parents and, parents being over involved in what the child is doing. Logical consequences are imposed, so they're not natural. They're imposed on a child for behaving in a certain way. They're only obviously effective if they're logically related to the behavior that the parent is trying to change. So, for example, if there's a rule that you only ride a bike with a helmet, and the child refuses to wear a helmet when he goes bike riding, then it's logical that the bike riding privileges are withheld for a period of time. It's probably not logical if the child refuses to wear a helmet and the parent loses temper and says you're grounded for a week. Like one has nothing to do with the other. Um, so again, the idea is that both, discipline strategies like both have their place, in our parenting toolbox, and what we use depends on the situation. So obviously, it's the preference is natural consequences, right? So for example, if the child is learning the lesson without us having to be the bad guy, so to speak, then that would be the preferred way to do it. Unless there's obviously a safety issue, like for example, in the bike riding example, you will not let the child learn from natural consequences because the natural consequences of riding a bike without the helmet can be disastrous. Right? So that becomes a safety issue. Natural consequences will take too long to occur. So again, it's not, if the child doesn't take their lunch to school, the natural consequences are pretty soon in the sense that the child remains hungry, right? But some natural consequences may take too long to be effective. Or if there's a social situation where misbehavior impacts another person. So yes, the natural consequences of a child behaving badly, say in the mosque, would be, that probably the child won't be very popular in the long run and may not have friends or whatever. But that's too far down the road, and meanwhile, a lot of people are getting inconvenienced by the behavior. So in that situation, again, you would choose logical consequences and not natural consequences. So the advantages of both of them are obviously that they tied to the behavior, that they separate the deed from the doer, and it does not shame the child. Right? So the whole idea with discipline is that the parent is not making the child feel bad about themselves. Remember, we said one of the defining things about punishment as opposed to discipline is that in discipline, the dignity of the child remains intact. So we're not we're not attacking the self-worth. Concerned with present and future behavior and helps children be responsible for their own. So again, the idea is that if you want to ride a bike, the rule is that you will wear a helmet. So if that's the choice. If the child chooses not to wear the helmet, then the consequences is that they're not allowed the privilege of riding a bike. And again, the idea obviously that it has to be in a calm environment. Now, the challenges, obviously, of using natural and logical consequences is that we must be able to think ahead and come up with a proper response, right? Often we find that, we're always on the reactive. We're pretty much, dealing with life as it shows up kind of thing, right? And we have a lot on our plate. And, that's why I started by talking about the family meeting, because again, that's a time where you can actually talk about, what would be the appropriate consequence of a behavior. And again, if children themselves are invited to participate in thinking about the natural and logical consequences, it really gives them a very good, like a completely different frame on which to deal with, because they recognize the reason why we're doing something, the reason why the consequences are important, and it invites them to come up with the consequence, again, saving you from having to always impose discipline. Now, so extremely important that the parents must not step in and save the child. So in terms of, taking lunch to school, for example, the obviously for all parents, it is hard to see, if the child is hungry and they come home. Right? But if we know it's not a safety issue, there's been no known cases of people suffering long-term damage because they missed a meal. We know it's not going to be anything major, right? Yes, they will have a really uncomfortable afternoon, and the next day they are very likely uh, to remember their lunch. So, again, the idea is that the child must be allowed to experience the consequence, and it takes time to put into action and may not work the first time. So, and another thing which I should mention is sometimes, putting the consequence in place will be inconvenient for the parents also. Like, let's take an example. If the child is regularly late to school, and you know that it's not that they don't like school or they, um, it's not like, because for some children, uh, by the way, that's unusual, but for some children, it would be, if you said, what, if you're not ready on time, you're going to have to find your own way, or you're going to not go to school, for example. Um, some children that might be an escape. So obviously that would not be the right thing to do, right? But given that most children do want to make it to school, but say if they're 13, 14, and they just cannot get their act together and they're not ready in time, and you say that, what, I have to go to work, so I'm going to leave and either find your own way to school or whatever. So in the short term, it is going to be inconvenient and uncomfortable for you. But if you follow through and if you do it, then obviously the child is going to be, because again, it's nothing that you have done. You have said that the car leaves at 7:30 or 8:20 or whatever the time is, and you simply, because why are you doing it? Because obviously if they're late, their siblings are late, and you're late, right? And so their behavior should not be allowed to impact the whole family. So if you leave and you have to obviously figure out childcare and everything else for this other child, or figure out how they're going to get to school, it's going to be difficult. But the idea is it will be a great learning experience. When I give my child logical consequences, he negotiates with me too much or gets upset, and I give in to his will. He doesn't accept things. So again, the idea is that, I like to tell myself and other parents that children will do what they do, and parents need to do what they must do. So just because he is negotiating or he's getting upset, how is that, like, honestly, it sounds strange, but I was like, how is that my problem? If he's upset, great. Like, unfortunately, he is upset. But if I give in and if I continue to be inconvenienced by his behavior, then I'm going to be upset, right? So, it sounds really weird, but the idea is that the children need to recognize that their behavior has impact on other people, and they cannot hold, other people hostage. And children don't recognize this. It's, why I'm saying this is because it's our job as parents to teach them that. Sometimes it takes a month-long hard work to correct one habit. It's all about patience. Of course it is. And, parenting is not for the faint-hearted, and it's not a short-term thing, right? Again, discipline, training, it's all, it takes time. So again, to check whether the consequences are effective, we have to ask ourselves, are they related? Are they related to the deed? So, giving again the example of the helmet with the bike, that was, if you lose bike riding privileges, obviously they're related. Are they reasonable? So, we can't say that you're never allowed to ride the bike. But, if you forget, if you're not wearing your helmet, then 3 days, 5 days, whatever, you come up with together, they have to be revealed in the sense that you have to tell the child that this is going to be the consequence. In other words, when they choose the action, they choose the consequence. And this, I believe, by the way, is Islam, because that's what Islam says to us. Like Hasan, there is no compulsion in religion. Basically, when you choose your action, you are choosing your akhirah. Similarly, that's what we're pretty much teaching them, that these are the ground rules. So the choice is yours. You either ride a bike with the helmet or you don't ride the bike. Obviously, they need to be respectful. So none of this is about making the child feel bad about it. It is about training the child to be a human. And repeat it back. In other words, so when you explain, when you're setting ground rules, for example, in a family meeting, and you come up with the rule and you come up with the consequence, it's a really good idea to ask your child back to you to check their understanding. Because again, children have different levels of understanding, and they may have understood something completely different. So again, obviously, all good meetings have minutes. So we will be taking minutes of just things that were decided. And but even so, I would actually ask the children to feedback what the rule is, and I think we will just go over this once, and then we can stop. The six-step method for achieving cooperation. When parents first hear about that, they think it's not going to work, because again, and this is really good for, often we find ourselves nagging at what are called transition time, right? So when you're calling children for dinner, or you're calling them for salah, or you have to leave the house and they're really engrossed in something, and we find ourselves nagging or screaming or whatever for them to come on, come on, come on. So this is, this strategy is basically for use on at those times. So here it is. And again, the idea is that we need to do it, practice it exactly as it's written, and try it, because it does work nothing works 100% of the time, but this is actually extremely effective. So first of all, we often give instructions when we're not in the same space, and that is never useful for small children when we are training. So the idea is that we stop what we are doing and we look at the child. So I find it's a very good idea to actually get eye to eye level with the children. So if the child is, playing with blocks on the carpet, I would actually kneel down and look at the child at eye level. When you do that, obviously the child is going to stop what they're doing and look at you, right? That is a, normal, natural response. You may have to wait for a few seconds. It may not be immediate, but it will happen. Then give the instructions simply and only once. So you say, Sahib, it's time for dinner. Please put away your blocks and wash your hands. That's it. Then you ask the child to repeat the instruction back to you. So Zahid, what did I say? Stand or you sit, whatever you're doing, and wait. So the idea is that you do not engage anymore with the children, and simply wait for them to repeat back, what they have told you. Now, very important that you praise every step in the right direction, no matter how small. So, for example, if they look at you, thank you for looking. You put the block down, say thank you for putting the block down. So again, the idea is it sounds very contrived, and it is, but it works. So, again, so everyone who's skeptical out there, and I can really get that because, it's easy to believe that, it won't work. All I can say is try it and practice. Just like the child needs practice, discipline, we need practice and discipline in parenting. So the idea is, uh, you know, that, let's try it and see what happens. Um, so no warning beforehand, like 5 minutes. You know, reminds me of my mom. I think it's not the end of the world to warn, but see, again, it also, like, say for example, if dinner time is at 7 every night, okay? So yes, you can, give a 15-minute warning to everyone. It's 6:45. That's it. Like no nagging, nothing, right? And then the idea is that when we basically train our children to respond to how we, so for example, this is very common, right? You tell them come for dinner, the child ignores. When you say come for dinner, the child ignores. Then you raise your voice, and uh, the child ignores you. You raise your voice even more, the child ignores you. Why? Because we've trained the children that this is the normal thing. This is the drill. That's what's going to happen. Mom's going to call, and then she's going to call, and then she's going to yell, and then she's going to scream, and then she's going to threaten, and that's my signal to go down, right? Um, so the idea is that we train them, and in order to change the training, obviously we need to do something different. So it's the warning. Yes, you can give one warning, but I wouldn't give more than that. And certainly, again, do not engage, mom, 5 minutes, I'm not finished, let me finish this, whatever. The warning really helps. No struggles, then they know what to expect. This is when they're young, I know exactly. Yes, so again, the idea is that if you're doing something in your house and that's working, please continue to do it. None of this should be meant, this is the only way to do it. Definitely not. There are obviously a lot of parents who've never attended a parenting course who are doing a wonderful job parenting, right? So the idea is not to change what you do, which is working. It is just to offer suggestions for where we might find ourselves stuck. Sounds like a great tool. Yeah, and again, the idea is, practice it, see if it didn't work, think about whether we followed steps exactly. And, if we didn't, again, we're learning too. So the idea is to be compassionate with our children and to be very compassionate with ourselves and to keep trying. So inshallah, we will do this bit next time. Again, the idea is that the more proactive we are, the easier it's going to be to manage discipline. And, the three buzzwords that we will see again and again: positive, firm, and consistent, and of course, patient. What should we do if they say no, or worse, just ignore? Okay, so again, the idea is to follow the script. And, if you wait the first time, it will take a while, but you will be surprised that a lot of times they will actually, I mean, listen, anything is possible, right? But the idea is that for many children, this works really well. And again, if, do it, like, commit to actually trying it for 2 weeks in a row, right? And then, then see, if it's working, if it's not working, what needs to change. And the idea is, again, that whenever we're talking about any strategy, it's in the whole context, right? So we're also talking about logical consequences. What would be the logical consequence or the natural consequence of not coming on the dinner table? It's having no dinner that night, right? Obviously, we also need to remember the family meetings. We also need to remember the positive time out, time in, and again, it's the whole package. So for us to practice this week, if we are using time out in our house, just evaluate it, see if it's working, if it's not working. Are we are we putting the frame on it properly in the sense that are we using it to calm them and ourselves down? We can start practicing the 6-step method, and obviously, again, notice what's working, verbalize it to children. Just like pay attention, get it back, and the work is done. So I think that's the end for today. And inshallah, keep at it. I love hearing from everyone during the week, especially, obviously things that are related to the class, if things are working well or not working well. And inshallah, see you all next week for Allah.